During the 1980s, the United States of America, and to an extent other developed first world countries, materialism, excess, consumption, consumerism, and greed ran rampant in many facets of society, making these hyper-capitalistic practices more prevalent than they had ever been before. According to altmaterialism.com, quote, "Baby boomers born after the Second World War were mature and ready to take advantage of low inflation and interest rates. Shopping was America's new obsession. In the first 5 years of the decade, 91 million U.S. households purchased 62 million microwave ovens, 63 million VCRs, 57 million washers and dryers, 88 million cars and light trucks, 105 million color television sets, 31 million cordless phones, and 30 million telephone answering machines. Shopping malls were Americans' second homes. The 80s was a time when brands defined the individual. Creating a persona through possessions was a common trend. Buying the right kind of car, wearing the right clothes and shoes, and being part of the good life created an image for everyone to see. Competition through spending was a new trend that changed consumers' attitudes towards buying." End quote. It was in this decade that people seemed to fuse together with their own material possessions, essentially defining themselves through what they had instead of one's actual moral character, personality, traits, or actions. This was a result of the recovery from the recession in the earlier part of the decade, and the U.S. economy was only bolstered by Reaganomics, which promoted free markets, lower income tax, and a tightened money supply to reduce inflation. It was this type of materialistic spending and careless regard for long-term finance implanted in the minds of many American people, among a myriad of other factors, that led to the economic recession of the early 90s, as a consequence, leading me to believe that when people say the land of the free and the home of the brave, they must not mean financially free, seeing as Americans are unparalleled in how they manage their money. But this type of societal behavior didn't go unacknowledged by Americans, as it was mocked, parodied, critiqued, and satirized during and after the fact by many forms of media and entertainment. But the novel version and movie version of American Psycho and the video game Wall Street Kid do it best, as they capture the financial practices of rich Americans both shortly after and during the 80s respectively, by presenting their audiences with narratives of affluent men whose investments work for them during a period of consumerism and hypercapitalism. And by the way, yes, Wall Street Kid is a video game about investing in the stock market. Pinch me so I can wake up from this fever dream. Anyway, by doing this in such an effective way, they put a satirical spin on the era and do what no other forms of media could have possibly done better. Although there are no direct parallels between the stories of Patrick Bateman and Wall Street Kid, as they simply refer to him as, you're creative if you ask me, we can look at the similarities and see what makes these two pieces of media so similar in their messages, starting off with what we see in the characters. In both American Psycho and Wall Street Kid, the narratives in question focus on a brief amount of time in the lives of a wealthy investment banker and a wealthy investor, respectively. If you didn't already catch on, making the characters essentially baby boomer monopoly men is a great setup for the critique of financial and Wall Street culture in the late 80s, since them being so caught up in the middle of it gives us a first-hand, albeit exaggerated, look into how these practices of a society affected individuals and small groups. Patrick Bateman is an investment banker living in a luxurious high-rise in central Manhattan, putting in at least $10,000 suit on every day, only to procrastinate at work, nay, literally not even do anything, and then blow his money on expensive dinners, spa appointments, expensive dinners, and hookers. The only sensible transaction he makes. So filthy rich that a pool of gold coins he could dive into would be the cheapest thing he owns. Patrick being a serial killer and getting away with his crimes, along with not being treated for his condition, only goes to show how caught up in profits and their own problems the people in the 80s were, as the primary reasons Patrick gets away with his crimes is because the real estate agent disposed of his victims' bodies, so the property value wouldn't go down. Nobody would listen to Christie's cries for help, and Carnes mistook Alan, one of Patrick's victims, for some other guy in London because of the collective identity that ran rampant in American Psycho. From what we know, Wall Street Kid, on the other hand, doesn't kill anyone but actively participates and funds the excess and lavishness of his 80s yuppie lifestyle by day trading and waiting for his stock portfolio to make him his money, meaning both characters don't actually partake in any work. The game's cast of characters really do drive home the satire the game is trying to portray, since every character, to one extent or another, is taking unrelenting action to acquire wealth in hopes of becoming human Scrooge McDuck. Larry, the lofty lawyer, cares about your girlfriend too much. Priscilla, the pricey prima donna, poses all the struggle in the game as it's just a quest to finance her more than lavish lifestyle. And Ruth the ruthless banker, Stanley the crafty consultant, Ralph the regal realtor, Art the artsy artist, and Connie the arrogant advisor, the best character of the game with her corny and pun-filled sense of humor. But while the video game pokes fun at the era in a more comedic, family-friendly light, in American Psycho the whole cast is after wealth and luxury, but a lot of it, as we can clearly see, comes out of the ostentatiousness of the characters and their want to distinguish themselves from the collective identity. The movie and novel show the ruthlessness and apathy the characters have for each other by vividly showing and describing their disregard for human equality and life without censorship. Besides Patrick and the Wall Street Kid, there isn't much mirroring the two pieces of media that many people can see, since they do both enjoy ostentatious, luxury-filled lives with nothing but excess money to spend, but Evelyn has a high-paying job of her own, as any true yuppie would, so she probably wouldn't leech off of her significant other and isn't as relevant to American Psycho's plot as Priscilla is to hers. Patrick also doesn't seem to be as interested in Evelyn as Wall Street Kid is in Priscilla, since Patrick ends up dumping her.
I'm, sorry, you're not terribly important to me.
And not caring, since Evelyn is a relatively minor character and isn't exactly pivotal in terms of the plot. Besides the protagonists and their significant others, there are virtually no parallels between the characters. Carnes can't really be compared to Larry, there's nobody in Bateman's inner circle that echoes anyone in Wall Street Kid's lineup, but the underlying messages in the form of social commentary in the video game, novel, and movie stay mostly the same. Both pieces of media use how their characters are affected by the consumerist culture among the top few percentages in society by showcasing what can happen when these kinds of ideas and mentalities can do to individuals and groups in a satirical and exaggerated light. It perfectly critiques the many faults of the institution. One makes the point that in a world that's purely motivated by the acquisition of profits, and people are so wrapped up in themselves, yet have to conform to a collective identity, it would be the perfect place for a serial killer to thrive. The other also makes a point that in a society of financial incentives, you know that everyone around you is after money, making you ask yourself, what real incentive or selflessness is there? In fact, they give social commentary on these topics so well that no other piece of media does it better. Both American Psycho and Wall Street Kid give their social commentary on their respective issues in a satirical and overly exaggerated way, but nothing can even come close to the type or quality of social commentary these pieces of media gave to their respective issues revolving around the financial culture of the 80s, as they do it in such unique ways. In American Psycho, it exaggerates by showing us the lengths the Wall Street yuppies would go for their own ostentatiousness, their greed, disregard for other people, lavishness, and repulsiveness as people, among other traits that defined the 80s in New York. It points out how morally bankrupt they are, but most certainly not economically. In the beginning of the movie, Bryce states that their bill that came out to $570 was a reasonable price. Patrick lies to Courtney about taking her to Dorsia, the most prestigious restaurant among the yuppies.
Are we here?
Yeah, Courtney, you're gonna have the peanut butter soup with smoked duck and mashed squash. New York Matinee called it a playful but mysterious little dish.
Just so he won't seem poor, points out randomly that he has a better haircut than Marcus Halberstram, sweats when he realizes Paul Allen has a better business card than him, kills Paul Allen because of it, panics when he realizes Paul has a better apartment than him.
There is a moment of sheer panic when I realize that Paul's apartment overlooks the park.
Almost kills Lewis because of his business card, and that's not even half of them. All of which were just from the movie. In Wall Street Kid, they exaggerate by making every character in the game have to be vigorously after money and or a leech to emphasize the message that the late 80s was an era where people were extremely selfish and assisted only if involved profit, to the point where they were so rich they could be inhaling Gucci. Priscilla is just someone you have to spend money on. Larry is really suspicious in what he says and is always so focused on Priscilla, and just about everyone charge money for their services. In making everyone out in their respective worlds to be selfish and wrapped up in their own images, really drive home the absurdity of what effects this decade had on people. The consumer culture and ridiculous amounts of spending during those times were parodied in such a cynical and exaggerated way that only the most absurdly overdramatized yet critical pieces of media could be compared to the style of American Psycho and Wall Street Kid.
It's simply unavoidable.
American Psycho and Wall Street Kid give excellent social commentary like no other piece of media, addressing the eccentric, consumerist, hyper-capitalistic, and lavish culture of the latter part of the 80s, because their immense exaggerations and satirical methods are unique takes on the decade. The storytelling perfectly encapsulates the lengths people engulfed in the culture of the era would go. Their characters are perfect representations of what the consumer-based narcissism branded individuals with, literally branded, as both revolve around name brands, and their settings in and around big city areas provide the perfect playing field in which the greediness of Wall Street Kids could go. No other art or medium of expression has come close to the style and methods that the book, movie, and video game have used to creatively and originally critique and reminisce about an absurd part of a decade. Hey guys, I just wanted to make this, I just wanted to take this time to, really just thank you for being here, and watching through to the end. These videos, long-form videos, actually, they're shockingly, really time-consuming and hard to produce, so, as a result, I just wanted to thank you for being here and, just, show my appreciation for you guys, sticking around and actually, enjoying the content, if you will. So, yeah, that's just my, thanks to you. And I will, see you in the next one.